Greetings, happy spring from Whisky Uncorked. Glad to have you back today where we're going to be doing another quick review of the Arran 10-year-old. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with this bottle as it has become an absolute darling amongst the online Scotch whiskey community. But just in case you don't know, Arran whiskey is actually made at the Loch Ranza distillery on the Isle of Arran. So similar to Annock, where Annock is made at the Knockdhu distillery, that the brands and the actual distillery name don't necessarily line up. So the Isle of Arran is generally known for unpeated malt. However, they have in fact made a number of peated versions like the Macri Moor. Now recently they have opened up a second distillery on the Isle of Arran known as Lagg, L-A-G-G, where they are producing exclusively peated single malts. Haven't gotten to try one of those quite yet, although it is probably one of the fairly small number of brand new craft type distilleries that I would be willing to probably buy a bottle. However, I do not believe that those are available anywhere here in the States, and having them shipped over makes it somewhat not economically viable, so I'm waiting patiently for them to come overseas. So it's probably about 4 years ago now, the Arran did a complete rebranding, and I would say that generally speaking, this is one case where post-rebrand that the distillery has been getting a lot more positive attention. Now, of course, that's anecdotal. Many of the other distilleries that have done rebrands over the years, the whiskey was at least as good, if not better. But a lot of the times the perception is that they tend to not be the same or be worse. Around the same time, Arran also released the Quarter Cask, which was a non-age statement, I believe it's cask strength, bourbon matured whiskey, and the Bodega, which is also a non-age statement, but heavily sherry matured whiskey. They've also released port versions, and I believe Sauternes versions, and maybe even like an Amarone cask or something like that. But they've released a selection of younger, non-age stated, higher proof whiskeys for the enthusiasts to explore. Now, these all came out around the same time, and I was really excited about this. I had heard such great reviews of it, and I was intent on getting one as soon as it got here to the States. I was keeping my eye out, going out fairly frequently, checking around shops to see if it had landed at the stores here yet. And as soon as I saw one, I picked one up. If you would have asked me back then, when I was basically done with the bottles, which one was my favorite, I would have told you it was the Quarter Cask. At that time, I felt the 10-year-old was good, but didn't necessarily grab me like some of the other bottlings I was sampling at that time, like the Craigellachie 13, the Bunnahabhain 12, etc., etc. So because of that, since then, I haven't rushed out to buy another bottle of it. However, in that time, this has become one of the most well-liked, most well-celebrated 10-year-old introductory bottles, and probably to almost any brand out there, at least amongst the online enthusiast community. It has gotten near widespread, obviously not universal acclaim, but this is almost always at the top of the list as bottles for new Scotch whiskey enthusiasts to go out there and grab, to introduce them to a relatively affordable, available, great specs, non-chill filtered, natural color, 46% ABV, bottles of single malt Scotch whiskey. Another thing that helps this thing stand out is that it is entirely bourbon cask matured, which is fairly unusual. The Deanston 12 is also bourbon cask matured, as is the Glencaddam 10, also community favorites. However, a lot of the more traditional introductory bottles to these brands tend to be of adding of sherry and bourbon casks. So certainly for me, this alongside with the aforementioned Glencaddam and Deanston 12 bottlings have really set me down a path of loving bourbon matured single malt scotches. But I would say over the last couple of years, as this continues to have gotten significant attention from the single malt Scotch whiskey community online, I've basically said, yeah, it was fine, but it's not necessarily as good as everyone else says it is. I probably would have been a little bit more set in stone on that opinion had my brother not sent me a sample of this in a blind with the intention of me probably confirming his opinion that this is, in fact, a bit overrated. However, it won the blind easily. So ever since then, I've had it in my mind, I gotta pick up another bottle of Arran 10 and finally make up my mind as to how good this thing really is. That only picked up once I started this YouTube channel and I realized that, hey, I better be able to talk about this in a more contemporary fashion and be able to speak about it a little bit more confidently and not waffle and talk about what I thought about it 3-4 years ago. So as you can see, I've been getting into this bottle just a little bit. I'm sure this bottle will continue to open up over time, and by the end of it, this may go one way or the other. But before that, let's get some tasting notes. All right, so as I mentioned, the stats on this are great. It is 46% ABV, natural color, non-chill filtered, and entirely bourbon cask matured. Additionally, this isn't the cheapest bottle here in the States. Again, this is pretty similar. For a lot of these bottlings where you look at the UK prices, and you know that they're getting probably a little bit of a better deal. But at the end of the day, this is coming in line with a lot of these other quality, well-presented, naturally presented single malt scotches in the 10 or 12-year-old age range. Because this is about $60 or $65 plus tax. The Total Wine here has this at $66 plus tax. I think you can probably find it cheaper depending on where you are. But being in California, so randomly things tend to be maybe a little bit more expensive or a little bit cheaper depending on who's doing the importing. Now, this is an increase in price over the years, but at the end of the day, this is what it costs right now, and it is not out of line with other classics like the Bunnahabhain 12 and the Deanston 12, et cetera, et cetera. All right, let's get into nosing notes. So a big thing with the Isle of Arran is citrus notes, and that is absolutely the case on the nose here in particular. We are talking about orange and lemon, maybe a little bit of that pithiness. There is absolutely a malt quality to it. That's not surprising, right? You're getting some fairly straightforward bourbon cask matured 10-year-old single malt Scotch notes, touch of vanilla, a little bit of oakiness, some dryness, some dry grass, that sort of thing. But the thing that's really going to set this apart on the nose are those, or what I pick up as orange and lemon citrus notes. So when the mood strikes me, depending on where my palate is or where my nose is at, sometimes those citrus notes start to go a little bit more in the tropical direction, right? We're talking maybe some young kind of tart pineapple, or maybe some underripe mango, that sort of thing. But I'll talk a little bit more about that on the palate. All right, cheers. Here we go. So the upfront mouthfeel is almost like a fizzy effervescence. It's light, but it's kind of pillowy. It's a very nice mouthfeel. Not incredibly viscous, although you do get a bit of oiliness left over. But up front, you are getting more of the vanilla, maybe a little bit of sweet honey. And then when you swallow it, the fireworks start. Now, when I first opened this right in the middle of the palate, right after swallowing, there was a bit of a grain punch, right? There was a little bit of youth to it. It wasn't overwhelming. It wasn't like the Isle of Raasay review that I did a few weeks back, where it was just obviously a young whiskey, and it is. It was 4 or 5 years old, and that's what you can expect from a young whiskey that isn't really overly done with cask influence. So you start out with some vanilla, some honey, and then you get some grain, but at the same time that's happening, you're getting some traditional maltiness, some barley sugar, that sort of thing. But there is a citrus quality that comes with it as well. However, it's almost more like a orange or lemon Starburst candy, or a candy chew if you're not familiar with Starburst. There's a distinct, it's almost like a sweet tang that comes with it. I used to be a huge Starburst fan. In fact, I still am. I just don't eat a whole lot of that type of candy anymore. And the best ones were always the reds and the pinks, which are like cherry and strawberry. But the orange ones could be sneaky good. And the lemons, most people don't love them, but when you get it a little bit in a single malt Scotch, it's kind of surprising, and it actually works really, really well. So there are times though where this goes from that kind of candied citrus note to more of a tropical note, which, I'll mention it again, is one of my current favorite notes that I can get in single malt Scotch, period. This is a little bit different than maybe like the Ben Nevis, where she can pick this up even in the Ben Nevis 10. It's a little less dirty and heavy and a little bit more juicy and fresh. But yeah, we're talking pineapple and mango. Again, similar to maybe some notes that you can pick up on the nose, but a little more underripe there, where on the palate they come across a little bit more juicy. So depending on the night, depending on the pour, this can range from that kind of candy citrus to a more juicy tropical fruit. All right, let's go in for a second sip. So right now it is leaning towards more of that tropical note for me. I think both of them are fine. It kind of depends on what my mindset is and how I want to focus on it. But just to wrap things up, at least for this, on the finish, as it dries out, it's a decent finish. It's medium. It's not this big, long, complex thing that's happening. It lingers and it fades, and it turns into maybe a little bit more traditional citrus, a little bit more lemony. There is some dryness. You can either look at that as that dry grassy note that I was getting on the nose, or maybe as a bit of a citrus pith. There's a slight maltiness. I'm not getting too much in the way of chocolate, which is a common bourbon note on the finish, which is fine. I don't know how much that goes with when it's a heavy orange flavor. It's pretty good. I think chocolate goes well with orange, but if it's more of a lemon or even a tropical fruit, I tend to enjoy a little bit more of oakiness or some dry pithy notes. So one thing that really gets me excited about this is there used to be a 14-year-old Arran. This is in the old branding. It was known to be bourbon cask matured, maybe even fairly heavily refill bourbon. And this became a favorite of, I think, whiskey enthusiasts, especially in terms of the bourbon cask lovers out there. It was discontinued, I believe, right at the time that they switched over to this, and they have not brought it back yet. So you can see where this is going. If you've had that 14-year-old Arran before, you totally can see the direction that this is heading in, which is exciting. If they are ever able to bring back that 14-year-old age statement or an equivalent, and it's bourbon matured or refill cask matured, that sort of thing, it appears that they are still making a whiskey that can go in that direction, because that 14-year-old is known for being a tropical, fruity, lightly cask influenced example of Isle of Arran. Hopefully we see something more in the mid-teens bourbon cask influence. Maybe they can keep the price down a little bit. Maybe even if it's like a 13-year, whatever they need to do to kind of keep that affordable and available for the enthusiast drinkers. I think that would be fantastic and has me excited. But let's talk about a score. So this whiskey is much more in line with my current preferences. I am thoroughly in my bourbon cask phase, and I especially enjoy it with some age on it and maybe some refill barrels. And that tropical fruit note for me is like the pinnacle of that style of whiskey. Whether it's a cleaner, fresher, juicier version like this, or you get a little bit of heavier, dirty notes like you get in the Ben Nevis line. The one downside here maybe is, like I said, you can pick up a little bit of youth, a little bit of graininess. It's pretty subdued. It's getting less the more I drink this, but it's there. And you may need to give it a little bit of time for that to fade. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put this as a 7 out of 10. Very good. So there aren't a whole lot of other 10-year-old kind of introductory branded whiskeys that I think that I would give a 7 out of 10. I gave the Ardbeg 10 a 7 out of 10, although for me personally, it's probably a little bit of a 6. But if I'm kind of being honest and trying to give a more general rating of what I think would be a useful score for you all, 7 out of 10. I gave the Bunnahabhain 12 an 8 out of 10 because that is absolutely fantastic. And this isn't too far behind that Bunnahabhain 12. Obviously, a very different style in terms of the Bunna being much more sherry influenced. But I think generally in terms of quality, those two whiskeys are pretty on par with the Bunnahabhain, maybe having a little bit more layered experience in terms of those sherry notes and just managing that really well. So this is maybe almost the opposite of like the Ardbeg review I did, where for me and my real personal preference, I might consider giving this an 8 out of 10. However, I understand that I'm probably just really focusing in on one thing that I love about it, and almost maybe getting more excited about what another bourbon cask matured Isle of Arran whiskey is going to do with maybe another 4 or 5 years of age on it. So again, officially 7 out of 10. If you twist my arm and say right now, today, what do you think about it? What would you give it? I might say 8 out of 10 on the right day. But again, I think this is an overall well-made, high-quality whiskey, and I am in line with the rest of the Scotch community at this point, that this is an absolutely fantastic example of a bourbon-matured whiskey and another example of a variation of what a bourbon-matured single malt Scotch can be, as opposed to, as I mentioned earlier, Glencadam 10, Deanston 12, even the Craigellachie 13. I think there's some sherry in there, but mostly I kind of think of it as a bourbon matured whiskey as well. All right, guys, I think my opinion probably isn't going to get any worse about this bottle. I think I've kind of settled my nerves and to say, yes, this whiskey deserves much of the praise that it gets. I don't necessarily think it's head and shoulders above other whiskeys that are really, really good. I've mentioned all of these whiskeys that I've just mentioned, I think are at least on par with this, and maybe a little bit of heavy focus comes in on this. Maybe this gets a little bit more attention than, or it's a little bit of an attention hog at this point. However, I know in the UK, this is about a 40-pound bottle, so that's a pretty solid deal for a whiskey of this quality. Again, here, if we're paying $70 after tax, it gets a little bit more difficult to justify, but it's 2024. And as I've mentioned before, 2024 kind of sucks. I say that somewhat facetiously. We still get great whiskey in 2024. It's just people really are putting us to the test, whether it's the distilleries or the importers or just inflation and everything that's going on. This being a $70 bottle, or maybe a few years ago, this would have been much more in line at the $55, maybe, let's say $55 range, maybe 55 plus tax, but it is what it is. All right, guys, so I'm going to try to keep this to the point. This one might actually have been a little bit longer, but thank you again for watching. Please subscribe to the content if you've liked what I've done so far. Like the video if you thought that this was a decent example of my whiskey reviews. And if you're really generous, leave a comment. Let me know what you think of this bottle, or maybe some alternatives that you think sit on par with a bottle like this. But until next time, guys, thank you and have a great day. Cheers.